So you've seen the Star Wars movies and you love them. So you want more Star Wars stories, and so you start reading some of the books. And you pick up the books, you read the books, you go through all those different types of things, and then somebody says to you, well, why don't you start reading the comics? And you think to yourself like, well, comics are for kids, right? Wrong. And then it's like you're thinking to yourself, well, okay, but surely they're not making the really important stories in Star Wars like part of the comics, are they? Well, yes. Yes, they are. Which obviously means that you're walking through the bookstore and you ask yourself like, well, what Star Wars story should I pick up today? Should I go get a book? I'm not going to pay attention to the comics. Those obviously aren't the important stories. Those aren't the ones I need to pay attention to. I'll get to those stories later. Don't do that. You need to pay attention to the comics. And I'm not even trying to be mean about that. It's just so many people want to sidestep the comics or push the comics to the side because they tell themselves like, well, these aren't the important stories, or I can read those later. Yeah, don't do that. Let's read the comics. But I know that the comics can be overwhelming. Comic books just in general can be an overwhelming thing to follow because there are so many stories, so many ways to take in the stories, and that's what this video is going to do today. It's going to help you guys figure out where to start, what stories might be out there, and then you're going to be ready to start reading on your own. How's it going, everybody? My name is Jake Ruddle and I'm one of the content creators here at Youtini.com, and today we are going to be talking to you about all things Star Wars comics. There's a lot to talk about with the comics, so we're not going to waste any time today. We're going to jump right in, let you guys know everything that it is you need to know to get started with Star Wars comics. But before we do, I want to remind you guys that this video is brought to you by Audible. If you're looking to jump into audiobooks with your Star Wars novels, there is no better place to pick up those audiobooks than from Audible. The production quality, the sound effects, the music that you're getting, there is literally no better way to have a Star Wars movie in your ears and to take in these awesome stories than with the audiobooks that you can download from audible.com. The best part about this is if you go to www.youtini.com/audible, you can sign up for a free trial and you will get your first book on us. Even if you decide to not move forward with the subscription, you will get to keep that free audiobook. We're taking care of it for you, but I think you're really gonna like it. All the information that you need is on the website, youtini.com/audible. You're not gonna be disappointed. So let's go ahead and jump into the Star Wars comics. Star Wars comics are not a new concept. The comics have actually been around since the first movie came out in 1977. If you have some of the older Star Wars comics, you may notice that throughout the years they've had different publishers. Some might be Marvel, some might be Dark Horse. There's a long history of Star Wars comics, and we're going to talk about everything that you need to know with that here in just a minute. If you've been following along with Disney's purchase of Lucasfilm, which happened within the past decade, you're going to be aware that there are essentially two different timelines in the Star Wars universe. All those stories that were coming out after The Return of the Jedi was released in 1983, those novels and comics that were released in the 80s, the 90s, and even the 2000s around the time of the prequels, all those stories have been kind of moved off, not to the side, but they're referred to as legends. With that purchase of Lucasfilm by Disney in 2014, the Star Wars creators decided that they wanted to start fresh with a brand new timeline, brand new stories that were going to tie into the movies and essentially give a brand new continuity that we'd never seen before. Those stories are referred to as canon. I'm not going to go too far into the differences between canon and legends in this video because we have a separate video where our host Emma actually gives you the whole rundown of everything that you need to know on the differences between canon stories and legends stories. The link for that video is below. You can check it out if you haven't already. It's a great resource for anybody who's just kind of starting or if you just need a quick little reminder. The big year that you need to know is 2015 because that is the year that Star Wars #1, which can be found in Skywalker Strikes, was released. Any of the stories that came before Star Wars #1 in 2015, those are legend stories. Any of the stories that came after Star Wars #1, those are your canon stories. Now, if you're watching this video right now, you're probably trying to decide or at least figure out the best way to take in the comic book stories or how you're going to read these comic book stories. Depending on what you've seen on TV or in movies or just have talked about with your friends, you may know that you can pick up a single issue comic. We've got trade paperbacks. we've got some hardcovers, we've got a bunch of comics in one book. There's a lot of different things, and I mentioned it before, it's a little overwhelming. If you don't know where to start, that's what I'm here for right now. I'm going to help you figure that out. The best way to keep up with the new releases and the things that are coming out each week sometimes is to pick up the single issues. These are the issues that you can subscribe to through like Amazon or the Comixology app. And they're also the issues that you can pick up from like your local comic book store. If you go down each week, they get their deliveries in of the new single issue releases. You pick them up, you can read them right then. Personally, I buy mine digitally. I subscribe to the comic books through Amazon, and they're sent right to my iPad whenever midnight hits. And I can sit there right in my bed and read the comic and flip through on my iPad and get the story right away. Some of you guys may be interested in supporting your local comic book shops, which is great. If that's the case, I do recommend that you go down to your comic book shop and tell them that you're wanting to pick up the Star Wars new releases when they come out, and they'll make sure that they have them there for you. Most people who are going to want the comics on their shelves are going to pick up things like the trade paperbacks. Once a comic run hits about 6, maybe 7 issues, they're normally put together and sold in what's referred to as a trade paperback. Those 6 or 7 issues are normally going to consist of a complete story arc within the whole run. Sometimes you're going to get what's called an annual thrown in there. Trade paperbacks are also a little bit nicer because they save you some money. With the way that they're set up, you're getting those 6 or 7 comics really for the price of one. And the story normally makes a little bit more sense because you're getting more of a complete arc within the actual trade paperback. If you're just picking up the single issues, a lot of times you'll notice that each short single issue ends on somewhat of a little cliffhanger, and then whatever little story arc that is being told is finished by about the 6th issue. That's a pretty nice little stopping point to put everything together in one little book and sell it that way. So the trade paperbacks are very popular. Trade paperbacks normally price out at about $15 to $18 depending on where you're buying them from, whereas a single issue subscription is going to charge you about $3.99 every time a new issue drops. So there are some price conscious things to be aware of. Now, while it's not really considered a trade paperback, sometimes the comic runs will come out in hardback. So with the Star Wars run that started in 2015, this was the second hardback that came out, which collects issues number 15 through 25. Essentially what you're getting here is 2 trade paperbacks in one hardback. But it's really up to you to decide whether you want 10 issues in a hardback or 6 issues in a trade paperback. The catch with the hardbacks though is that they are not going to be released as fast as the single issues or the trade paperbacks. The hardbacks normally come out much later. So if these are what you're wanting to collect on your shelves, you're probably going to have to wait. Now, sometimes you may hear trade paperbacks referred to as graphic novels, and there's a difference between a graphic novel and a trade paperback. The graphic novels stand alone. The whole entire story from beginning to end is in one nice little package. The trade paperback is going to be a section of a much larger story. So when Star Wars The Force Awakens released their comic adaptation, the entire story of The Force Awakens is in this one book. But Star Wars Skywalker Strikes is the first trade paperback out of 13 in the entire Star Wars run. So graphic novels, you get everything in one package. Your whole entire story is right here. Trade paperbacks, you're going to need a bunch of these to make your whole story come together. It can be a little confusing because a lot of times you'll hear us use graphic novel and trade paperback interchangeably. So when you want to be that person that's like, but you said in your video that there's a difference between graphic novels and trade paperbacks, don't hold that against us. A lot of people use them interchangeably. It's not like a Youtini thing. Our big time collectors are probably going to be interested in what we refer to as an omnibus. There was a Darth Vader run that went alongside the Star Wars run that started in 2015, but Darth Vader ended after issue number 25. Once that entire run was completed, all the trade paperbacks came out, some hardcovers came out. They published the entire Darth Vader run in what they refer to as the omnibus. This has the entire Darth Vader story that started in 2015 in one hardcover. The omnibus can be a little bit pricey. This one retails for $100. But remember, you're getting about 25 to 30 comics in one book. So while that might sound a little bit steep, I guess it all depends on how you look at it. Like I mentioned with the hardcovers before, there is a catch with the omnibus. They normally come out much later than all the other ways that you can buy comic books. So the omnibus isn't going to be available until way after the trade paperbacks and all the other comics have already been published. There are some Star Wars comic runs like the Darth Vader 2017 run that have been finished for a while and they still don't have an omnibus. So if that's something that you plan on waiting for but you want your comics right away, this may not be the best option for you. But if there's an omnibus out there and it has one of the stories that has finished and you've never read it before, this might be a really good option for you. So now that we have that out of the way, a lot of you all are probably thinking to yourself that now I know how I could pick these up or how I could read these comics. Where do I start? One of the things that we drive into people's heads at Youtini.com is that there's no right or wrong way to start reading Star Wars. Particularly, there's no right or wrong place to start reading. Comic books, though, do require a little bit more of a targeted approach. It's not as simple as just picking up one of the novels and saying, okay, this is where it might fall in the timeline. The reason for this is because comic book runs normally extend over a large period of time, and they're numbered as far as where they fall within their overall story. So you're not going to want to start reading Poe Dameron number 17 before reading Poe Dameron number 1 through 16. A good way to think of it is that no matter what run you're looking at or no matter what run you want to start with, find number 1 and read that first. There are a couple trade paperbacks that you can pick up like Age of Republic Heroes. These Age of sets are nice places to start because they're just like 5 or 6 standalone stories all in one trade paperback. The bigger runs like the Poe Dameron run or the Star Wars run or the Darth Vader runs, those have 25, even up to 75 issues, and you're going to want to pay attention to which number it is that you're reading. It doesn't really matter the time period. Find the characters that you like. Find the era that you want to read about. There is probably a comic run, but make sure you start with number 1. If you are just getting started though, I do recommend taking a look at some of the canon comics as opposed to Legends stories. Remember, the canon stories are going to be what ties into the movies and even the video games and all the other different Star Wars media that's being published right now. We have a link to the Youtini website below that's got a whole page on all the different comics that you could start with. So if you're interested in what Luke and Leia and Han were up to in between A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back, you may want to start out with the Star Wars run. If you're interested in what was going on with the Resistance and Poe and Leia before the events of The Force Awakens, the Poe Dameron run might be a good one for you to check out. Maybe you're a Darth Maul fan and you think about what Darth Maul was up to before the events of The Phantom Menace. Well, there's a Darth Maul run that covers everything that he was up to. You can even see what Darth Vader was doing after the events of Revenge of the Sith. You have so many options to pick from, and that's what makes the comics great. If you're interested in the Legends comics, but you're worried about where you may be able to pick those up because it's been 20 or 30 years since they've been published, Marvel has made things easy for us by publishing what they call the Epic Collections. The Epic Collections give us all the Legends comic stories in nice little volumes. So like this is one of the volumes from the Clone Wars. There are also volumes that cover the Rise of the Empire, the New Republic, all the different eras that you can find in the Legends timeline. There are still new volumes of the Epic Collections being published, so you can check them out on Amazon, pre-order them if you want to, and it can be a little difficult to find some of the older volumes, but they're still pretty easy to pick up if you know where to look. Amazon, eBay, all those types of places. I'll find them at my local Books A Million. I know jumping into Star Wars comics can seem difficult. There are a lot of things to take into account, like what you want to read, how you want to read it, the era, the characters. There's so many things to think about. And you don't want to drive yourself crazy trying to decide because Once you have an idea, it's not too difficult to figure out. The bottom line is we're getting some really great stories in the comic runs, and they're definitely worth it to read. I was one of those people. I was reluctant to pick up comics for the longest time because I always told myself if it was that big of a story, they'll put it on the big screen or somebody will write about it in a novel. The comics were the things that I could just dust off and maybe read a little bit here and there. But once I started reading some of these stories, so many things clicked into place. I made so many different connections between the movies, between some of the books, and I was getting an experience that I really never had anticipated that I was going to get before. So whether you want to pick up your stories as a trade paperback, whether you want to wait for the omnibus, whether you want to subscribe to those single issues through Amazon or Comixology, all you got to figure out is what character you want to start reading about or what era you want to jump into. I know I mentioned it before, but there is a link below to the comics guide on Youtini.com, and it has a whole rundown on where you can pick these comics up. It's got more details on some of the comics that I talked about today. It's got everything that you need to know to get started. If you have any questions, be sure to leave those in the comments below, and I will get back to you either in the next video, or I might even respond to your comment right on YouTube, or just reach out to us on social media and we will get you everything that you need. Once again, my name is Jake Ruddle. You can get in touch with me on social media or through any of our Youtini social outlets. I'm always here to help fill you in on all the best Star Wars content, no matter what it is. Until our next video, make sure that you check out the Youtini Living Force podcast, which you can download anywhere that you download any podcast ever. Or you can check out the podcast live on Monday nights at 7. You can follow us right on Twitch, where you can see Corey, Charles, Eric, and the whole gang put on one of the best Star Wars shows that is available. If you're looking for that more intimate experience, make sure that you check out our Patreon site, where you get behind the scenes looks, extra content, merchandise, and a ton of other perks delivered right to you. You can check out our Discord, our Twitter, our Facebook, our Instagram. Basically, if there's an app on your phone that you can put your thumb on, Youtini has a way that you can connect with us. Check it out. I will see you all next time, and until then, the Force will be with you always.